and keeping that tree before us for a breastwork, to stand in a triangle or three fronts, enclosing our horses in the center. We did so, and it was well we did, for never was a more furious charge than the creatures made upon us in this place. They came on with a growling kind of noise, and mounted the pieces of timber, which, as I said, was our breastwork, as if they were only rushing upon their prey, and this fury of theirs, it seems, was principally occasioned by their seeing our horses behind us. I ordered our men to fire as before, every other man, and they took their aim so sure that they killed several of the wolves at the first volley. But there was a necessity to keep a continual firing, for they came on like devils, those behind pushing on those before. When we had fired a second volley of our fusees, we thought they stopped a little, and I hoped they would have gone off, but it was but a moment, for others came forward again. So we fired 2 volleys of our pistols, and I believe in these 4 firings we had killed 17 or 18 of them, and lamed twice as many, yet they came on again. I was loath to spend our shot so hastily, so I called my servant, not my man Friday, for he was better employed, for, with the greatest dexterity imaginable, he had charged my fusee and his own while we were engaged. But, as I said, I called my other man, and giving him a horn of powder, I had him lay a train all along the piece of timber, and let it be a large train. He did so, and had but just time to get away when the wolves came up to it, and some got upon it, when I, snapping an uncharged pistol close to the powder, set it on fire. Those that were upon the timber were scorched with it, and 6 or 7 of them fell, or rather jumped in among us with the force and fright of the fire. We dispatched these in an instant, and the rest were so frightened with the light which the night, for it was now very near dark, made more terrible, that they drew back a little. Upon which I ordered our last pistols to be fired off in 1 volley, and after that we gave a shout. Upon this the wolves turned tail, and we sallied immediately upon near 20 lame ones that we found struggling on the ground, and fell to cutting them with our swords, which answered our expectation, for the crying and howling they made was better understood by their fellows, so that they all fled and left us. We had, first and last, killed about 60 of them, and had it been daylight we had killed many more. The field of battle being thus cleared, we made forward again, for we had still near a league to go. We heard the ravenous creatures howl and yell in the woods as we went several times, and sometimes we fancied we saw some of them, but the snow dazzling our eyes, we were not certain. In about an hour more we came to the town where we were to lodge, which we found in a terrible fright and all in arms, for it seems the night before the wolves and some bears had broken into the village, and put them in such terror that they were obliged to keep guard night and day, but especially in the night, to preserve their cattle, and indeed their people. The next morning our guide was so ill, and his limbs swelled so much with the rankling of his 2 wounds, that we could not go no further, so we were obliged to take a new guide here, and go to Toulouse, where we found a warm climate, a fruitful, pleasant country, and no snow, no wolves, nor anything like them. But when we told our story at Toulouse, they told us it was nothing but what was ordinary in the great forest at the foot of the mountains, especially when the snow lay on the ground. But they inquired much what kind of guide we had got who would venture to bring us that way in such a severe season, and told us it was surprising we were not all devoured. When we told them how we placed ourselves and the horses in the middle, they blamed us exceedingly, and told us it was 50 to 1, but we had been all destroyed, for it was the sight of the horse which made the wolves so furious, seeing their prey, and that at other times they are really afraid of a gun, but being excessively hungry and raging on that account, the eagerness to come at the horse had made them senseless of danger, and that if we had not by the continual fire, and at last by the stratagem of the train of powder, mastered them, it had been great odds but that we had been torn to pieces. Whereas, had we been content to have sat still on horseback and fired as horsemen, they would not have taken the horses so much for their own, when men were on their backs, as otherwise. And withal they told us that at last, if we had stood all together and left our horses, they would have been so eager to have devoured them that we might have come off safe, especially having our firearms in hands, being so many in number. For my part, I was never so sensible of danger in my life, for seeing above 300 devils come roaring and open-mouthed to devour us, and having nothing to shelter us or to retreat to, I gave myself over for loss. And, As it was, I believe I shall never care to cross those mountains again. I think I would rather go by 1,000 leagues of sea, though I was sure to meet with a storm once a week. I have nothing uncommon to take notice of in my passage through France, nothing but what other travelers have given an account of with much more advantage than I can. I traveled from Toulouse to Paris, and without any considerable stay came to Calais, and landed safe at Dover the 14th of January, after having a severe cold season to travel in. I was now come to the center of my travels, and had in a little time all my new discovered estate safe about me, the bills of exchange which I brought with me having been currently paid. My principal guide and privy counsellor was my good ancient widow, who, in gratitude for the money I had sent her, thought no pains too much nor care too great to employ for me, and I trusted her so entirely that I was perfectly easy as to the security of my effects, and, indeed, I was very happy from the beginning, and now to the end, in the unspotted integrity of this good gentlewoman. And now, having resolved to dispose of my plantation in the Brazils, I wrote to my old friend at Lisbon, who, having offered it to the 2 merchants, the survivors of my trustees, who lived in the Brazils, they accepted the offer, and remitted 33,000 pieces of 8 to a correspondent of theirs at Lisbon to pay for it. In return, I signed the instrument of sale in the form which they sent from Lisbon, and sent it to my old man, who sent me the bills of exchange for 32,800 pieces of 8 for the estate, reserving the payment of 100 moidores a year to him, the old man, during his life, and 50 moidores afterwards to his son for his life, which I had promised him, and which the plantation was to make good as a rent charge. And thus I have given the first part of a life of fortune and adventure, a life of Providence checkered work, and of a variety which the world will seldom be able to show the like of, beginning foolishly, but closing much more happily than any part of it ever gave me leave so much as to hope for. Anyone would think that in this state of complicated good fortune I was past running any more hazards, and so indeed I had been, if other circumstances had concurred. But I was inured to a wandering life, had no family, nor many relations, nor, however rich, had I contracted fresh acquaintance, and though I had sold my estate in the Brazils, yet I could not keep the country out of my head, and had a great mind to be upon the wings again. Especially I could not resist the strong inclination I had to see my island, and to know if the poor Spaniards were in being there. My true friend, the widow, earnestly dissuaded me from it, and so far prevailed with me that for almost 7 years she prevented my running abroad, during which time I took my 2 nephews, the children of one of my brothers, into my care. The eldest, having something of his own, I bred up as a gentleman, and gave him a settlement of some addition to his estate after my decease. The other I placed with the captain of a ship, and after 5 years, finding him a sensible, bold, enterprising young fellow, I put him into a good ship, and sent him to sea. And this young fellow afterwards drew me in, as old as I was, to further adventures myself. In the meantime, I in part settled myself here, for, first of all, I married, and that not either to my disadvantage or dissatisfaction, and had 3 children, 2 sons and 1 daughter. But my wife dying, and my nephew coming home with good success from a voyage to Spain, my inclination to go abroad, and his importunity prevailed and engaged me to go in a ship as a private trader to the East Indies. This was in the year 1694. In this voyage I visited my new colony in the island, saw my successor, the Spaniards, had the old story of their lives and of the villains I left there, how at first they insulted the poor Spaniards, how they afterwards agreed, disagreed, united, separated, and how at last the Spaniards were obliged to use violence with them, how they were subjected to the Spaniards, how honestly the Spaniards used them, a history, if it were entered into, as full of variety and wonderful accidents as my own part, particularly also as to their battles with the Caribbeans, who landed several times upon the island, and as to the improvement they made upon the island itself, and how 5 of them made an attempt upon the mainland, and brought away 11 men and 5 women prisoners, by which, at my coming, I found about 20 young children on the island. Here I stayed about 20 days, left in supplies of all necessary things, and particularly of arms, powder, shot, clothes, tools, and 2 workmen, which I had brought from England with me, a carpenter and a smith. Besides this, I shared the lands into parts with them, reserved to myself the property of the whole, but gave them such parts respectively as they agreed on. And having settled all things with them, and engaged them not to leave the place, I left them there. From thence I touched at the Brazils, from whence I sent a bark, which I brought there, with more people to the island, and in it, besides other supplies, I sent 7 women, being such as I found proper for service, or for wives to such as would take them. As to the Englishmen, I promised to send them some women from England, with a good cargo of necessaries, if they would apply themselves to planting, which I afterwards could not perform. The fellows proved very honest and diligent after they were mastered, and had their property set apart for them. I sent them also from the Brazils 5 cows, 3 of them being big with calf, some sheep, and some hogs, which when I came again were considerably increased. But all these things with an account how 300 Caribbees came and invaded them and ruined their plantations, and how they fought with that whole number twice, and were at first defeated, and one of them killed, but at last, a storm destroying their enemies' canoes, they famished or destroyed almost all the rest, and renewed and recovered the possession of their plantation, and still lived upon the island. All these things, with some very surprising incidents and some new adventures of my own, for 10 years more, I shall give a further account of in the second part of my story. The end.